What's up guys? With TBC Classic coming in a week or so, you might be getting overwhelmed with questions like, what's my stat priority? What gear should I be going for? And you might be seeing things published and you're not sure of their validity. So today, I'll be covering the stat priority and the best in slot list for Phase 1, pre-raid, with all of my insights coming from patch 2.4.3, which is the patch that this expansion is based on. As Shadow Priests, we have a relatively straightforward stat priority list, but it's useful for you to understand why these stats are in the order that they're in. Starting with the number one stat, we have spell hit rating until capped. Bosses in TBC have an inherently high chance to resist your spells. Luckily, this can mostly be mitigated by getting to the spell hit cap. The spell hit cap for casters is 202 spell hit rating. You may also see spell hit being expressed as a percentage, so 202 spell hit rating is equal to 16% spell hit. Now normally that would mean we'd have to get 202 spell hit rating from gear, but as Shadow Priests, we have the luxury of 10% of our spell hit being covered by a talent called Shadow Focus. So if you have Shadow Focus maxed out, all you need is 76 spell hit rating from gear to get hit capped. Some other things worth mentioning, Draenei's give 1% hit to everyone in their party, including themselves, so if you are a Draenei priest, you only need 63 spell hit rating or 5% hit to get capped. Now the most important thing to note here is that you do not gain any additional benefit from more spell hit rating after the cap. After you get spell hit capped, spell damage is by far and away your most important stat as a Shadow Priest. And unlike hit rating, spell damage has no diminishing returns as you get more of it, and it will remain your number one priority all throughout the expansion. Your third priority, or second after hit cap, is spell critical strike. Now, there's a good reason why spell critical strike is below spell damage. First, dots and channeled spells cannot critically strike. So Vampiric Touch, Shadow Word Pain, Mind Flight gain absolutely no value from critical strike. So we only have two spells that benefit from critical strike, and those are Mind Blast and Shadow Word Death. And both of those spells have a cooldown. Plus, they're pretty taxing on our mana, and early geared priests won't be able to cast them on cooldown. And last, we don't benefit from an additional critical strike modifier like the Ruin talent for Warlocks, so our critical strikes are only doing 150% of the normal damage. For the rest of the stats, this is where things sort of get trivial, but for the sake of the video, I will assign a priority to them. For me, the fourth priority would be Spirit. Spirit provides a couple of benefits. First, mana regeneration outside of the 5-second rule is directly proportional with Spirit. And since Shadow Priests typically spec into meditation, we get access to 30% of that spirit-based mana regeneration, even while casting. And the other benefit comes when you have an improved Divine Spirit Priest. You see, improved Divine Spirit causes each player in the raid to gain spell power and healing equal to 10% of their total spirit. So while the per point dividends for Spirit isn't huge, it is there. Every 80 points of intellect, you get 1% spell crit, and every 10 points of intellect, you get 150 mana. It's quite a weak stat, but most of our gear is going to have intellect on it already, so there's no real choice here. My sixth priority stat would be MP5, since it's just a worse version of Spirit. It's certainly not a bad thing if it comes on a BiS piece, but other than that, it's not worth thinking about. The lowest stat on this list, besides hit rating after cap, is stamina. Every 10 points of stamina, you get 100 health, and that's great, but it doesn't give us any additional throughput. It does jump up on the priority list for mechanics with a health requirement, like the Earthquake mechanic on Doomwalker, but in those cases, most people just swap in a couple of PvP pieces. Okay, on to the good stuff, your pre-BiS raid gear. I made this list with a couple of things in mind. For most slots, I'll be giving you the theoretically best option and the best alternative that can be obtained without a huge time commitment or gold investment. For gloves, there are a few options here, but I recommend Tempest Touch. This is a quest reward that comes from completing the Black Morass Attunement quest chain. Very easy to do, and it's something you're going to do anyway, so it's a great pickup. For bracers, you can get Bracers of Havoc, which are an excellent pair of BOE bracers from Tailoring. Alternatively, you can get either of the two Season 1 PvP bracers. It's really up to your personal preference. The difference between all three is pretty small. For your necklace, it's another benign choice here. The easy one to obtain is Natasha's Arcane Filament, which comes from a quest chain that starts with this item in Blade's Edge Mountains. Again, alternatively, you could use the Season 1 PvP neck, and I'll leave that one up to you. For belts, you have an interesting choice. choice. You can either go with the expensive and technically best option, which is the Girdle of Ruination, which starts the theme of expensive tailoring BoE items to come. The free option is Akama's Sash, which comes as a quest reward from the Akama's Promise quest. This is a very easy quest chain in Shadowmoon Valley. Unless you have like an unlimited supply of gold, I'd highly recommend going with Akama's Sash here. And that's because, unlike other tailoring items on this list, this belt is easily replaced in tier 4 content. Now, 2 items from tailoring that you won't replace in tier 4 are the Spell Strike items. That's the Spell Strike helm and the Spell Strike legs. I consider these absolutely mandatory since they last until late tier 5 or even early tier 6. But early on they will be very expensive, so farm up. For rings, you have quite a few choices. If you're coming from vanilla and you have the Ring of the Fallen God from turning in the Eye of Cthulhu, you're covered for at least 1 ring because that's Pre-BiS. And if you also have Band of the Inevitable from Naxxaramas, you're all set for rings. But if you're watching this by the time the pre-patch is over, don't worry about getting them. There are alternatives. The first alternative I'll mention is Seer's Signet, which you can purchase when you're exalted with the Scryer faction in Shatrath City. And an easy alternative would be the Mana Storm band, which comes from a quest chain in Netherstorm. And if you're really desperate, you could buy the Corium Band of Shadows, which is a jewel crafting ring, but only get it if it's really cheap. Your Pre-BiS boots, shoulders, and chest all come from the Frozen Shadowweave set. Just like the Spell Strike set, I consider this set to be mandatory for raiding as a Shadow Priest. And that's because of how insanely long this set will last you. I mean, the Frozen Shadowweave boots will last until Sunwell, so once you've accepted the fact that you're going to have to part ways with a ton of gold, take a note of the fact that these items are bind on pickup, meaning that in order to wear them, you need to craft them yourself. And in order to craft them, you have to be a Shadowweave tailor, which simply requires a visit to Shadowmoon Valley after hitting 350 in tailoring. If you guys are interested in a step-by-step guide on how to craft this set before Karazhan comes out with time to spare, let me know in the comments and subscribe while watching this video. Onto cloaks. Not many great options here, honestly, and I hate to recommend another tailoring item, but Cloak of the Black Void is pretty good here. But a free alternative here would be Cloak of Woven Energy, which comes from a very easy group quest in Netherstorm. Okay, onto the very impactful trinkets. The best option here is the Icon of the Silver Crescent, which is an item that comes from the Badge of Justice currency. Whether you get this item before raids release is entirely up to how fast Blizzard releases raids in the first phase and how the Badge of Justice system is actually implemented. Your other trinket should be Quagmiren's Eye. This drops from the last boss in the Slave Pens on heroic mode. For your wand, you want the Wand of the Netherwing. It's a very strong wand for this early on, and it drops from Blackheart the Inciter, which is a boss from the Heroic Shadow Labyrinth dungeon. For weapons, our best option is to use a main hand and an offhand. For the main hand, there's a ton of options here, but I recommend the Starlight Dagger since it also drops from Heroic Slave Pens, which will already be farming a lot for Quagmiren's Eye. For offhand, the strongest option is the Orb of the Shadow Eater, and that's another Badge of Justice item, so I can't exactly tell you that you'll be able to get this before raids. But if you can't get it, there's an easy alternative that you might have already, which is the Tome of Shadow Force. That's the level 60 shadow damage Alterac Valley offhand. Okay guys, that's it for me. I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.